Hi everyone, today we would be talking about the CSS Flexbox, also known as the CSS Flex, which enable us to arrange items within a container. So with the CSS Flex, we can arrange items both horizontally and vertically. So without wasting much time, let's get started with this. Like you can see here, we already have some predefined CSS styles in here. So this is our HTML document and it's something pretty basic. And what we have here is a parent div. This parent div is having the class of row, and then we have 5 other divs having different classes of div 1, div 2, down to div 5. So if we take a look at the CSS over here, we basically just tell the body to have this background color, give it some padding, margin of 0, and just basic stuff. So if you notice, we haven't really written any style on our row class at the moment because that's basically what we're going to be working on. But for the divs, that is these divs that we have over here, we have actually given them a background of white, padding, font size, as well as a line height. So for the classes of the individual div, that's for this div 1, div 2, div 3, div 4, and 5, we have actually just initialized the class name over here without giving it any specific styling. So I felt I should make that known before we go forward. Okay, so let's get started with this. If we actually want to use the CSS Flexbox in our CSS file, we basically need to give this a display of flex, as that's the first thing to do. And we have to place the display of flex in the parent container. That is, by the parent container, I mean the div or the element, whatever element that is, the div or the element that is housing all of the child items. So we need to place it on the parent. And one other thing we need to know about CSS Flex is that there are some CSS flex property that could be placed on the parent element, while some other flex property can only be placed on the items. That is, I'm going to call that the child element. So that's one thing to note. And as we go on, I'll be stating which of these things are going to be placed on the parent. In a matter of fact, the very first 5 or 6 item properties that I'll be making mention of would all be placed on the parent item, on the parent element itself. So let's just take note of that. So for the row, we are going to be given this a display of flex, and given this a display of flex simply turns the parent element into a flex box. So if I should save this now, we would observe that we have some changes over here whereby we have everything being stacked together. So everything just been stacked together, just like that. So the first thing I would like to tell us about the CSS Flex is actually something that we can use to create a bit of spacing between each of this box 1, box 2, box 3, and box 4. And that is basically what we call gap. I would like to talk about that first so that we just use it to make a little bit of spacing. So let's take a look at this. To explain this, I would have to remove the padding that we have over here. So let's say we want to leave some spacing over here. What do you think we're going to do? We'll probably might just want to give this a margin. So let's just say a margin of, let's say, 20 pixels. And when we save this, we discover that we have spaces in between them. But the problem of using margin is because it gives a kind of a spacing all around the div, and that's the problem with margins. So in this case, we might want to say, okay, let's not use margin, let's use margin right. So if we should say margin right in this case, and we save this, it appears like the problem is solved, but technically the problem is not yet solved, because if we should go this way, okay, I'll go further. If we should go this way, you can still see that we are having some sort of spacing at the right-hand side. And for some reason, we might not just need that space. So with CSS, with the Flexbox, I meant to say, we have a better way of doing this instead of using margin right, margin left, or margin. So there's basically a better way of doing this. And that is by using a property that we call gap. So we can simply say gap is equal to 20 pixels. And when we save this, we can see that the gap actually just added the spacing only between the items. It's not really adding the spacing around the item, but only between the item. And this is one very wonderful property that comes alongside with the CSS Flexbox. So it's just there's no margin at the top, no margin at the bottom, because we don't really have any other item at the bottom of this specific row at the moment. So we just have a spacing only in between them. Now, one other thing that we should take note of is that when we use gap, we actually can add spacing in between them horizontally and vertically, and I'll be explaining what that means in a jiffy. So to explain that, I'm just going to duplicate this item severally, and I'm going to save this. And right now, we actually see that we are having this only horizontally, and this is going to take me to the next item, which is the CSS Flex wrap. So the CSS Flex wrap would basically make us to be able to wrap the specific item so that we won't be having this kind of an overflow div. So I'm going to implement that right now. So I'm going to place that same in the parent container or in the parent element. So I'm going to say flex wrap. So that's flex hyphen wrap. So, and I would say that should wrap. If I should save this now, you can see that instead of us having a kind of an overflow over here, we end up wrapping the remaining item that's supposed to have overflowed. We just wrapped it down to the next row. And if we decide to add more of that, I'm just going to duplicate this again, save this, you'll find out that we have more. So back to our gap again, we'll observe that we are also having some sort of spacing between rows. We have some spacing here, spacing here, spacing here, and we also have some sort of spacing within the column as well. So one other thing we need to know about the CSS gap is that if we decide that we just need this spacing or this gap to be only within the column, we can also still do that with the column gap. So we can say we want column gap. When we save this, we can see that we have the gap only within the columns, and your guess is as good as mine. If you want it only within the rows, you simply say row gaps, and we just have the spacing only within the row, but only within the rows. But if you want this to appear both within the row and within the column, you just simply say gap, and that would work for both columns and rows. So this is basically the thing that you can just do with CSS Flex over here. So we've talked about the CSS gap and the flex wrap, and the next item that we're going to be talking about here is the flex direction. So the flex direction is actually something very interesting, and by default, the flex direction of every flexed item is basically row. So we basically have two directions, which is rows and column. And what we are seeing here is a good idea of a row direction. But before we move forward over to the row properly, I'm going to like to undo all of this. I'm going to like to undo this and save this now so that we'll just have basically 5 boxes there. I'm going to uncomment this, save this. Now we're back to normal. So what I'm going to do next now is that I would say on the parent container, I would then add flex direction, and I would change this to column. If I should save this now, we observe that instead of our boxes to go horizontally, this time around you're going vertically. So we can make our CSS, our flex item to either flex horizontally or vertically using the flex direction. But there is more to flex direction. With the flex direction, I can also say that this row should be in its reverse form. So I could say that the flex direction should be row reverse. And if I should save this, we observe that the box 5 is now the first item. We have the box 4 to be the second item, and it's just having this in its reverse form. And same thing applies to the column. So I can actually say column reverse, and if I should save that, we can see that we have the box 5 at the top instead of having the box 1 at the top. So this is just going to make this is just going to give us the inverse of the direction. It's just going to swap the position of the item in a given direction, I meant to say. So that being said, the next thing we would be taking a look at here is the CSS Flex Flow. Now, the CSS Flex Flow is like the combination of both the CSS direction and the CSS wrap combined together to make the CSS Flex Flow. So I'm going to comment this too. So we just have this way, and then I would then say that flex flow, I can then say the flex flow should be column. And if I should save that, you can see that we actually have this to be in the column direction. If I just say this should go to row, I can save this and we have row. I can basically use any value that I am using for the flex direction over here in the flex flow. So I can basically say again that row reverse, and it's just going to happen that way. I could also say that row column reverse as well. So saving this, I have the column reverse. Now we can see that we have basically used the flex flow to implement the functionality of the flex direction. But what about the flex wrap? Can the flex flow actually do what the flex wrap can do? So let's take a look at that now. But to see that, we will just need to duplicate this, so we will have something to wrap. So I'm going to duplicate this several times, and I'll save this item now. So instead of me to say flex wrap should be of type of wrap, I'm just going to say that the column should be what? Should be wrap. And when I have this over here, this is basically what I have. So we can now see that the flex flow can be used for both the flex wrapping and the flex direction. And I can also make this more interesting by saying I want this should be column, and I want this to also wrap. So we might not really see this taking effect right now because we don't really have a specific height for our container. But if we should give this a height of, let's say, 500 pixels, for instance, now you can see that we are having this wrapping even if it is even if the direction is column. And to show us what this is actually moving from top to bottom and then top to bottom again. So it's actually wrapping from the column direction, basically. So that is just it, and I will be taking the height out So one other thing I would like to tell us about the flex wrap is that the flex wrap could also be reversed. So if you take a look at what we have here right now, we just have all this box. So I could also say wrap reverse. And if I should do that, it's actually being reversed, but let's take a look at it properly. I'm going to undo this entire duplication I have made here. So I'm going to say this should wrap in the reverse direction. So let's say I have this. Let me create a very good scenario for this. I save this part. Great. So this is actually what wrap reverse does. So if I should just say flex should be wrap, and I save this, this is the normal behavior. It goes from the top to the bottom, and because of this actually ends here, these other places are now left vacant. But when I say that this should be wrap reverse, the inverse would happen. So if I should save this now, we can see that instead of us to have the empty space at the last row, it's then reversed, and then we're having empty space at the very first row. So that's just basically it about wrap reverse, but I'm just going to leave this as wrap at the moment. Sorry about that. We'll say this should be wrap. And I would comment this out, and I would keep this as row. All right, so I prefer it this way. But for now, I'm just going to remove this. So, okay, so we're good now. We're good. All right, so the next thing I would like to talk about is basically alignment. I call this alignment, and we have three different ways to align things. So we have what we call the justify content, the align content, and the align items. So just imagine you're working with a Word application like Microsoft Word, and you basically want to place all your text at the center, or you just want to do an align center. How do you do all those kind of things with a Flexbox? So that's what we'll be taking a look at next. So to do this, first off, I would need to comment my padding, and I'll save this. Great. And at this point, I'm going to say this property is also still used on the parent element. So like you can see, we're still working on the parent element, which is row. So in this case, I'm going to say justify content should be center. And if I should save this, we can see that our item is now being displayed at the center of our screen. So what justify content does is it takes the entire items and just place them at the position where we actually instruct it to be. In this situation, we are asking it to be at the center, and that's why it's at the center. We can also say that justify content should be left, and that's more like the default, right? So we can say that this should be right as well. And if we say save this, it goes to the right. So another thing we can actually say here is that this should be start, and it goes there. And start on left appears to be like the same thing, but they're technically not the same thing. So start actually goes to the starting position of our web page. So in a situation whereby our web page is using a left to right direction, our start would definitely be on the left. But if we're designing a web page whereby it's going from right to left, like an Arabic website, so our start in that case is going to be by the right hand side. So start doesn't always equals left. And the next property, the next value here, which is end, in this case, if I should save this, the end doesn't always equals right. So it's all depend on whether we're going from left to right, or right to left, depending on the language in which we're building for. So that's something to take note of, actually. So other values of the justified content is actually things like space around. So I'm going to say space around first. So let's give this a space around. So what space around does is that it simply creates a space around the div, by the sides of the div. It creates a kind of an equal spacing by the side of the div. I wish to explain this further. So let me open the developer tool so we'll be able to see this. Okay, so if we take a look at this now, assuming we can have a kind of a division over here, then we observe that the spacing between this point and this point, and the spacing between this point and this point, they are actually equal. The spacing between, like, from the middle of this div to here, and from here to the middle of the next div is actually equal. So that's basically what space around does. It creates a kind of space around the elements, by the sides of the elements that by the sides of the items, I meant to say. So I think I should expand this. Okay, great. So it creates a space by the side of the element. We also have more of that, and we have another one called space between. So space between would just ensure that the two last item touches the margin of the container, touches the border of the container. So let's say this is basically our container. In this case, our container is the div, the row, right? So box 1 would have to touch the left, it would go to the extreme left, while the last box would have to go to the extreme right. Then it's going to create a kind of an equal spacing between the rest of the items that we have over there. So if I should comment this out now, you can see that we still have a space in between box 1 and box 5. So that's just how that works. And the last value I'd like to talk about, still based on the justify content, is actually space evenly. So the space evenly is actually an interesting one. And what it does is that it just gives an equal spacing between each of the elements. So this looks so much like the space around, but it's different. If I should say space around now, you can observe the difference here. So take a look at the space in here, between here and here. And if I should change this again to space evenly, so you can see that we are having more space here. So what space evenly does is that it ensures that at every position, there is an equal spacing between each of the item. So the spacing that we have here is equal to the spacing we have here and equal to the spacing we have here. And that's not the case for space around, because the spacing we have here is obviously not equal to the spacing that we have here, and it's not equal to the spacing that we have here. So that's just a kind of a little difference between the space around and the space evenly. So that's been said, that is all about the justify content, and I would like to keep this to be, okay, I'm just going to leave this a space around for now. So the next item that we have here is basically align content. So to use align content, we might probably need more boxes. So this is really going to make sense, but okay, I think we can do with this. So to go ahead with align content, we can say align content. We can give this different values, and we have a value of center. And if I should save this, what this does is that it places our div, it places the entire of the div at the center of the parent div. Or let me say, it places the entire of these items rather at the center of the parent div. But it's appearing like it's not doing anything right now. That is because our parent div did not really have a specific height. So it's literally did not know where the center of the parent div is. So in this case, I'm going to give this a height. And now we're giving this a height of 500 pixels. And if I should save this now, you can see that this is now, let me do this. So we can see that this is the height of the parent div, 500 pixels. And we can see that the items are at the center of the parent div, at the center vertically at the parent div. So one other thing to take note of here is that justify content deals with the horizontal axis, while the align content deals with the vertical axis. So there are more things we can do with this. So we can basically say that we want these to go to the starting, which is basically at the top, or we want this to go to the end, and that's basically at the bottom. If we should inspect this, you can see that that is at the bottom of the parent div over there. So there are more values for us to play around with over here. So one of those values is actually, we can say this should be space evenly, space between and space around. So just like we have space evenly between and around for the justify content, we also have that for the align content. But this would actually make more sense if we have more items. So let's go ahead and add more items to this. So I'm going to duplicate this several times, and I would save this now. So I think we're having too much right now, so let's reduce this rate. Okay, let's still reduce this. Okay, great. So this is good. So what this does, space evenly, is just the same thing as the space evenly, given an equal space, but this time around it's doing it vertically. And when we say space between, you guys are as good as mine. So it's just going to take the items to the two extreme at the top and at the bottom, and leave a very big space in between them. And we can also say space around. space around, and when we save that, we can see that the space in here, it's just leaving a space around this particular row and another space around this particular row, because at this point it is dealing with the vertical axis of things. Okay, so let's go on. Another nice stuff that we have here is actually stretch. So if we should say this should stretch, it's just going to make every item to occupy the entire space. And when I say the entire space, I mean exactly that, the entire space. So this space that we are seeing here is simply because of the gap that we have here. So if I should take that away, you can see that there is no gap anymore in between them. And if I should take away justify content as well, we can see we just have everything like it's clustered together. So it's actually stretching everything vertically to be able to cover the entire space that we have. So I'm going to undo this to items here, and I actually don't want to use space. I'm just going to keep this at center as well. So this is what we have for the center value of that. So I'm just going to undo this now, save this, and let's go over to the next one. So the next thing that we'll be talking about here is basically align items. So align items could really be confused with align contents, but they are basically different. And the difference between align content and align items simply is align content is actually saying what is the position of the item in the container. Now, but for align content says what's the position of the item in the container, but for align item, it's simply saying what is the position of the item kind of within itself. So let's take a look at this now. Let's say we have align items, and let's say that is end. Let me use end for this. If we should save this, we are basically not going to see any difference, right? So, but let me create a scenario where this is going to work, where we're going to see a difference with this. So if I should say that the height of each of these boxes is about 200 pixels, we have them this long, right? But let's say we want a specific box. Let's just assume we want the box 3 to have a smaller height. So we're going to say that the height of box 3 should be 50 pixels, for instance. So at this point, we can see that box 3 is 50 pixels, but that is not actually reflecting. And this is because I have given this a height of 200 pixels here, and we can see that I'm using a much more precise styling for this particular div, so it's definitely going to overwrite this one. So I'm just going to make this to reflect by adding importance to this. So we can see this now. So we can see that this particular box here actually goes to the bottom because we have actually added an align item of end over here. But what's then going to happen if we add an align item of start? So let's say we add this to start. It will go to the top. And if we should say this should be center, it's going to go to the center. Let's talk about some other CSS properties for the Flexbox that can be placed within the flex item itself. That's within the children of the container. So the first one I would like to talk about is other. Now, other is something that I personally hardly use this, but there could be a use case for that, and I'm just going to show you how this works instead of just to talk about it theoretically. So let me undo this height first, and let me take this out of here. Okay, so ordering simply means that we can decide to reorder these boxes the way we want to without really going to the HTML and say that I want the div5 to appear at this particular point. Without touching the HTML, we can actually use CSS to reorder each of this item. And where we're going to go about that is to use the other property. So here we can say other, and we need to give this a specific number. So this number usually starts from 0. And one thing you should know about ordering is that the default value is usually 0. By default, even without giving this particular property over here, all these elements has the order of 0. So if we should come over here, for instance, and would say order should be 1. This is not going to work. So let's save this to see. This is not going to work, and it's not working because 1, 2, 3, 4, they all have the order of 0, and 0 comes before 1. And if we should give this the order of 0 again, it's still not going to work because right now they're all having the order of 0. So in that case, they're just going to go the way it is being aligned in the HTML. But what about if I should give this an order of 0 and I decide to give the div4 an order of 1, and I save that. Now, can you see that the box 5 and the box 4 had actually switched position, because according to the ordering over here, div5 is meant to take 0 and div1 and div4 is meant to take the ordering of 1. Okay, so let's say for our div1 now, we want our div1 to take the order of 2. So we now have box 5, 4, and box 1. So if I want to take this one, so let's say for the div1, we can give this an order of 3, and probably this one an order of 4. So I'm going to save this now, and this is basically what we have here. So this is it about CSS ordering using the CSS Flexbox, of course. So I'm going to undo each and every one of this. Great. So there are also more things we can still do with the CSS Flexbox when it comes to positioning the items itself. So one of the things that we can do is align self. So if you remember, we talked about align items when we are talking about the properties for the parent container or the parent element. So when we're talking about this, we talked about align item, and we say this could be stretch, this could be start, end, and so many other things. But what about if we want to, what about if we actually want to style these elements themselves? So I just commented out the align stretch over there, and I'm going to duplicate this element so we have a better view of this. So this is too much. So let me save this way. Okay, so but technically don't even need this. So let me just go ahead and save this. Let me give this a height of, let's say, 200 pixels, and we have that. And let's say div3 should have a height of 50 pixels. At this point, I have to make this important again. Okay, great. So if we want this div3 to appear at the end of this particular row over here, we can always just do it with our align item. But one other thing we could do is to use align self. So what align self does, we can say align self end, and when we save this, we say it just comes to the end. So what align self does is that instead of manipulating every single thing around within that particular container, we can also manipulate the individual item within the container. So I'm going to show you a very good example of this just now. So let me copy this now, and let me add this to the div1. And if I should save this now, can you see that when we say align self end, we're only doing that for the box 3, and it's not really affecting the box 1. But if I should comment this out, and then I uncomment this, and I should say align item of end, and I save this. So can you see that it is actually affecting both elements, because it's just going to make every single thing within that container to go to the end, to go to the baseline. So that's just it over there. So that's been said, I'm just going to take this away and uncomment this and leave this way. Okay, so that's it about align self. So we can basically do align self end, align self top, and starter meant to say align self, end, start, center, and any other value that we feel like adding over there. So next item now is what we call the CSS Flex Grow. So what exactly can that do for us? Let's see. For now, I'm going to remove the height, and I'll basically remove all of this. I'll save this so we can just have this. And to explain this, I'll need to reduce the number of divs we have here because I basically will be needing more space to explain this. Okay, so like I said, we are now talking about the properties that we can add within the child item itself. So definitely Flex Grow is one of those items. And if we should add a Flex Grow, so let's say Flex Grow, and what we need to do here is to give it a specific value. So I can just give it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a number we want. So for the sake of this, I'm going to I'll give this a number of 5. And if I should save this now, you can see that we already have this particular box 1 being very lengthy. And let me just show you this. So I'll explain this afterwards. So if I should say Flex Grow of 10, and I come over here and say a Flex Grow of, let's say Flex Grow of 3. If I should save this now, can you see what's going on here? So the div 2, which is our box 2 over here, has what? A Flex Grow of 10. And that's why we are having this the particular width of this particular div being lengthier than the rest of them over here. And now the next one has the Flex Grow of 5, and it's actually the next one when it comes to the size of the width. And this has a Flex Grow of 3, and it just goes that way. Like it's smaller than this one, and this one is smaller than this one. So if we should say this should have, or let's just say that this should have a Flex Grow of 0, and we save this, you can see that this just takes its original box size itself. Let's take a look at one other thing about Flex Grow, is that it actually maintains same ratio. So by that, let me change this to 10 again. So since this over here is the longest, and this next to this, even when we're resizing our screen, is going to maintain that until each of these actually gets to its smallest size, and that's when it stops. And because of we've enabled flex wrapping, we have each of this particular box wrapping. So that is just it basically. So the next item, we would be talking about the flex shrink. So the flex shrink is actually the ratio in which each of this particular item would shrink when we don't really have enough space for them anymore. So I'm just going to do that to explain it. So before I do that, I would like to take away our flex wrap, because for them to shrink, we don't want them to stack beneath each other. So we actually want them to shrink. So I'm just going to take away our flex wrap, and we can see what that does over here. So to control that, I'm just going to enable our align item. I'm just going to say this is center over here. Okay, so we're good now. I'm going to give each of those div a width, a specific width of, let's just say 200 pixels. And I'm going to save that. So we're all set to test this right now. So now we can say flex shrink. Flex shrink for this first one, I want this first one to have a flex shrink of 1. And I want this other one to have a flex shrink of, let's say 2. And the third one here, a flex shrink of, let's say 3. So if I should save this now, it appears like, let me open my developer tool. So it appears like nothing is happening here. But by the time I minimize, if you observe what's going on here now, you can see that they are all shrinking out at different rates. So the way that this particular box 3, which is our div 3 here, the way it shrinks is actually faster than the way this shrinks, and this is faster than the way this shrinks. So that's basically what the flex shrink is all about. So in a situation whereby we want to give a preference on a smaller screen, let's say we already know that this particular box here is going to have more text than every other box, or there are some specific item within this particular div that we just need this to have more space when we are on a smaller screen. We might just want to make use of flex shrink for that. So that is basically what flex shrink does. And the last item, the last item that we have here is basically the flex basis. So the flex basis, to explain this, I would need to remove the width from this, and I'm going to take, I think I should just Ctrl Z instead. Okay, and remove the width. So what the flex basis does is that it gives our flex item a specific size. I wouldn't really say a specific width because that's not really true, but it gives our flex item a specific size. So if I should say the flex basis of this, so let's say flex basis of this, if I should say it's 200 pixels, it simply means that the width of my flex box, of my box 1, is going to be 200 pixels. But it's not just really about the width, because the flex basis works with the direction of the flex box itself. So if the direction of the flex box is rows, which is the horizontal, it's the flex basis would apply to the horizontal axis. But if it is the column, which is the vertical, it simply means that the flex basis will apply in the vertical axis. So let's see this in action. Would come over here, and I'm going to change this flex flow. Remember, the flex flow is a shorthand for flex direction and flex wrap. So I'm going to change the flex flow to column. So if I should change this to column, now you can see that our flex basis now is being executed in a different way, because it's now having the 200 pixels to be the height of this particular div. The last property we have here is the CSS Flex property. So that works this way. We're just going to say flex, and the flex actually is a shorthand for the flex grow, the flex shrink, and the flex basis. So it goes in that order. The first value is going to be the flex grow, the second value is a flex shrink, while the third value is the flex basis. So to see this in action, I'm just going to use only one value for now. I'm going to give this a flex grow of, let's say, 10. That's for the box 1. And we can actually see that the box 1 has the flex grow of 10 over here. So I can actually apply a flex shrink to this, and I could say, let's say the flex shrink is going to be 100. We are not really going to see this in action right now, but we're going to see it soon. And here we're just going to say it has a flex basis of 0. So let's just use this for now, and to explain this better, I'm just going to copy this, and I would paste it at the other div, and I'm going to paste this here. So I'm just going to change some values. So let me say this should be 0. I don't want this to have a flex grow. I actually want to illustrate the flex shrink using the flex property itself. So I'm going to say that these should have a flex shrink of 5, and let's say this should have a flex shrink of 8. Why this has a flex shrink? This is actually the longest because of the flex grow, and it also has a higher tendency to shrink faster as well. So I'm going to be giving this to a flex basis of 100 pixels and a flex basis of 100 pixels, and I'm going to save this. Great. So we can see that these two boxes here are having a basis of 100 pixels. But now what happened when we try to shrink these items? So when we try to shrink, watch carefully. Now, from this part, do we notice that the box 1 is actually shrinking faster than the rest of them. Now, we might say that, well, it's because of it's the longest and it's obvious, but take a look at this. At this point, we can see that the box 1 is shrinking so fast. We don't, like the box 2 is yet to get minimized to this extent whereby we have the text wrapping. It's yet to get minimized to that extent, but because of the div 1 has a greater shrinking ability, it has actually shrunk to this particular size, and now we already have the div 2 and the div 3 being bigger than the div 1. Even if this has a higher flex grow, just because of the flex shrink is higher, it has a better shrinking ability. So if we are to predict the next one that is going to shrink among the box 2 and box 3, which would it be? So since this is the next one here, it should be the box 3. But let's see that. If we should go, and now we have the box 3, that the box 3 is actually shrinking over here. If we should move on, we have the box 2 shrinking over here. Now at this point, if I should change the box 2, the shrinking value of the box 2 to be 50, for instance, and I save this. Now can you see? We have the box 2 shrinking, and because of this is now higher than this, the box 3 remains that way. If I should undo that, so if I should take this back to 5 and I save this, we can see what's going on over here. So this is really all about the CSS Flexbox, and I hope you enjoyed this course. If you enjoyed this course, please consider giving this a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Bye for now.